I warmly welcome you to this session. We will devote the next 90 minutes to the presentation and discussion of our latest study on China's digital platform economy, which was published on our website yesterday. Let me say just one brief remark before we kick it off. Please note that we will be recording this event, and a link to this recording will be on our website by the end of the week. If you have any questions regarding personal data protection, please visit our data protection page on our website. The link has been shared in the chat that you see in the Zoom page now. So, talking about China's digital economy, platform economy, China's leadership has set an ambitious deadline to become a superpower in science and technology innovation by the 100th birthday of the People's Republic in 2049. China's digital industrial platforms are a crucial part of this ambition and already starting to compete on a global level. Our study, which was published yesterday, analyzes challenges and opportunities for German actors. It was kindly supported by the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. For us at MERICS, it was a very rewarding experience to collaborate with the ministry on that topic. We had many very interesting discussions with our partners and also with people from the industry, both in China and Europe. You can read the study on our website. The link was just posted into the chat. We started our research almost a year ago. A team of 7 authors contributed their expertise, and we are proud to present the results today. Let me briefly explain the agenda. In a minute, I will hand it over to Markus Heß, Deputy Director General for Industrial Policy and Future Mobility at the Federal Ministry of Economics and Energy. He will give a few introductory remarks. Afterwards, Kristin Shi-Kupfer, Research Director, Politics, Society, and Rebecca Arcesati, a junior analyst here at MERICS, will present the main findings of our study in a 15-minute presentation. We will then enter a panel discussion with Kristin and Markus Heß, and I am really proud to say that we will be joined by Svenja Falk, Managing Director of Accenture Research, and Andreas Hube, Vice President, Head of China Liaison-Office of a German software company, SAP. Warm welcome to you, Markus Heß, Andreas Hube, and Svenja Falk. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm sure we will have an engaging discussion later on. And dear participants, of course, you will also get the opportunity to ask questions to both our authors and our panelists at the very end of our panel. We do have a slide later on that explains how to use the discussion functions here at Zoom. You can either use a chat function by the Q&A function by just entering your question in written into a little screen, or you can raise your hand and I will unmute you and you can ask your question orally. I will repeat this information later on when we get to the Q&A, just reminding that during the panel we will just collect questions to have the discussion at the very end. But now, without further ado, let me hand it to Markus Heß. I will unmute him and just Audio ein. So something's not working here. Please bear with me. We can see him and now we can hear him. Markus, welcome.
Hi, good to be with you. Hello, everybody, online, offline, and in the digital sphere. Thank you very much. Big thanks to MERICS to host this meeting today, for inviting us to have an exchange on a topic that is of high importance for German industry, politics, and yes, in particular, the German-Sino relationship as well. What is the outset? We, from our ministry, aim at better supporting our companies to evaluate their traditional business and to find new, business models, new ways to create value. And this, without any doubt, will happen in the digital sphere. So digital business models are of utmost importance, and platform industries and platforms to exchange knowledge, trade, and services will be the big thing for the decades to come. That's pretty sure. But when you start that new endeavor, you have to learn. You have to learn what your customer wants. You have to learn what the framework situation where you offer your service or you want to offer your service is. And to this end, you need some relevant factors of success. How can we, from a government perspective, create favorable framework conditions? What are the needs of industry, of companies? What do they actually need to strive and to have good relationships in business terms? So we quickly realized perhaps we have some knowledge at home, but we need to look abroad. We need to look beyond national borders, something that within the European Union is nothing new. I mean, from the internal market perspective, is this something that is happening every day? But in an international situation, that is something fairly new to some market participants, because to check and find out what they need, it's important to go beyond borders, to check with experts, to find expertise, to base judgment on it, how to proceed as a government, and in how far it is necessary to get into contact with the official side on the other side for our business. So the industrial outset between Germany and China is quite well known. They are important manufacturing powers both. We share a strong industry. And sometimes it's complementarity there, sometimes it's simple competition, but that is fair enough. The market in China is the second biggest export market for Europe. So it's extremely important to find success there. And in a simple phrase, we are partners and competitors. And that makes it so interesting to find out what will be the best possible solution for companies to strive in China. So it is expected that in 2020, our platform economy will contribute to roughly 3% in China to China's GDP. So with a market value of 400 billion euros, the Chinese platform economy is doing quite well already by now. And the idea is, what is the best solution for companies to go there and find the niche, perhaps, but also the broad market access for their services and products. Pretty sure that COVID-19 has put a painful wake-up call in many aspects. Regarding our economy, we are much more aware about the importance of digital business models, such as remote functionalities. There is, and will be even more, a big push for the digitalization of the industry worldwide. Just to put it in an easy example to illustrate what is going on in China. During the first COVID-19 outbreak, a Chinese industrial internet platform supplier set up an online marketplace, a structure within 2 days. On day 3, it was connecting more than 200 suppliers of personal protective equipment, over 600 hospitals, and over 30 government organizations. That is awesome. But it shows the real world importance and impact of the industrial platform economy. It shows China's dynamic approach to the industrial internet. And to this end, the study from MERICS has impressively shown the high dynamics of the Chinese development as well as their limitations, which are there as well. So the opportunities cannot be realized without navigating the challenges in China's complex and difficult political environment. We are not only competing economically, but also to a certain extent politically. We defend values of democracy, human rights, rule of law, a social market economy, No news for all those who are in touch or part of European business models and marketplace framework. On the other hand, we face a state-run economy doing quite well in a more or less authoritarian regime. So what has that to say, and what is the impact of this for our industry and companies going there, which are more or less used to our way of doing business, way of organizing business and enabling business? It's a different sphere, that's for sure. So taking that, coming to the next point is that the regulatory environment in China is difficult. Cybersecurity measures and restrictions in cross-border data transfer are real challenges for European companies, virtual private network discussions just mentioned. But as data has become vital for future-oriented value creation in manufacturing, we must ensure the free and secure flow of data across national borders. We need a level playing field. Otherwise, our companies will not be well advised to engage in such an environment because there is no kind of safety and security requirements met, which they depend on and their business depends on. To this end, it falls all into place. Tomorrow, our Minister, Peter Altmaier and Bruno Le Maire will kick off the Gaia-X project on a European level. And they're gonna promote our philosophy of, to put it short, cloud computing of the way the Europeans would do it. As far as I'm told, there is an overwhelming response from industry to join this digital conference, and roughly 2,000 participants are already registered. So there is something we established that comes perfectly at the right time to meet the needs of industries who are aware that the data is the new treasure of the next decades to come. So from our ministry's point of view, we are heavily involved to establish a close cooperation with our Chinese counterparts, bearing in mind that the outset is quite different. But our Sino-German Industry 4.0 project is a good example how we can make ends meet, how we can bring together two different ways of thinking, two different ways of working, because in the end, the product, the quality, the processes, all the procedures behind a product are of high interest for our Chinese colleagues and for the Chinese market participants. And therefore there is a very good cooperation taking place in bringing across our thinking in how far and in which way Industry 4.0 technologies should be applied somewhere else. And to close in brackets the advertising brackets, I just can refer to Professor Falk. She is leading our Sino-German expert group on digital business models. She has to be joined by Kristin Shi-Kupfer, and both are with us today, and I'm looking forward to hearing about their hands-on experiences on this important project. Many thanks to both of you for your great work and commitment. Just a few words concerning the framework. We've supported MERICS to provide this in-depth analysis of China's platform economy, and MERICS has provided us with an insightful study that enhances our understanding of the Chinese approach, the agenda of the government, as well as the current developments and the status of the platform economy. As I said with my opening remarks, it's extremely important to know how the framework is put together in the market where you want to offer your products or services. And this study is an extremely helpful insight. And we are now better prepared for the next steps. We are seeking permanently for finding better ways of engaging with China, our long-term strategy, partner and competitor. So doing no business or ending the talks is no option to us. And the MERICS study has given important recommendations for how to shape our cooperation in a smart and strategic way. Many thanks again, and well, back to you, Claudia.
Thank you very much, Markus, for these inspiring remarks. I will just hand it on without further ado to my esteemed colleagues, Kristin and Rebecca, to lead us into the world of China's digital platform economy, which has, as Markus described, a very dynamic approach and but also and offers niches for foreign companies. But there are also limitations, and I'm really curious to hear what you have to say now. Floor is yours.
Yes, Claudia, thank you very much. Thank you also to Markus for your introductory remarks. Thanks to all of you. It's so good to have you all with us. A lot of expertise in the audience to talk and to engage into a discussion about this clearly important strategic topic. China's push into the digital platform economy is indeed ambitious, and it's also at the center of PRC's industrial policy, and that is of course also why it is so important for us. Indeed, digital platforms are a crucial tool, the latest tool, so to say, especially since 2017, for China to become an industrial superpower by 2025. And this is an assessment we have gained based on a review of all policy documents, all related policy documents from 2015 onwards. And it's really clearly laid out that this is part of a larger effort, and of course also linked to the parties, the CCPs, the Chinese Communist Party's self-chosen goal, the 2049 deadline, which is linked to the 100th anniversary of the party, to really enhance the status of becoming a superpower in global manufacturing, in research and development, in science and technology, and also in manufacturing. In that sense, it's also embedded in a whole ecosystem, so to say, of policy initiatives, which also links to goals like to achieve quality growth, to push forward with the industrial upgrading and transformation, and of also to move forward China's capabilities overall in terms of innovation. Finally, it's also linked to the success China has already delivered in terms of a platform economy when it comes to the B2C sector. E-commerce have been mentioned by Markus initially, also in relation to COVID-19. So the Chinese government really aims to replicate this success now in the B2C, the business-to-business sector, especially in the manufacturing realm. As you can see on the left, they really have set out an ambitious, comprehensive plan with goals, starting from how many companies should go cloud, how many cross-sectional platforms should be set up. They've already achieved this goal last year, also really covering all layers of the industrial Internet of Things stack, from apps, from standard settings. So it's an overall really comprehensive and very ambitious framework of targets we're looking at. And this set of targets, however, is set against or in the light of the current weakness in the level of development of digital platforms, which Chinese analysts, especially Chinese language reports, also address quite openly. And this is also consistent with the findings we have kind of mapped out in our own research. And they are threefold. The first and foremost, and also mostly mentioned weakness that China still has to face in going forward with digital platforms, is that they lack indigenous providers at nearly all layers of the industrial internet platform architecture. And not going into the details here, those of you, and I think many of you know, it's of course about the edge layer on the very bottom. We're talking about the SaaS, the software as a service layer, for example. And just to give you two illustrations of that weakness in terms of a lack of indigenous domestic providers. The PRC has to import almost 80% of high-end sensors and up to 90% of chips to meet the domestic demand in relation to the digital platform economy. And talking about the software as a service layer, the SaaS layer, over 90% of the high-end industrial platforms is foreign. And this is also why on the left-hand side, you see in Chinese language reports, these kind of ecosystems solely based on Chinese companies. You probably know many of them hire, of course, also XSMG, also Inspur, for example, and many more. This is, of course, on the one hand, a reality. These companies exist and they have moved into these layers, but on the other hand, they're not sufficient. They're not sufficient offering products in the sense of meeting the ongoing demand. Point number two here, weakness number two, is that the majority of the use cases of Chinese industrial digital platforms are still focused on a very low level, on a very basic level of helping enterprises to realize digitalization, getting various devices connected and their data into the cloud. Especially small and medium enterprises in China still struggle to recognize the potential to really also use this to develop new business models. And the Chinese language reports and media summarize this very nicely in the sense of we're not daring to use it, we're not able to use it, and we should not be bothered to use it, as a kind of attitude which small and medium enterprises in China still have, because they still have to make that first initial step to go cloud. A third and final weakness in that sense, that China has become a global leader in sectors we've talked about, this like e-commerce or fintech, but they still have a very low level of digitization in the manufacturing sector compared to any other area in the economy. And this is an issue because uneven digital connectivity of production equipment across industrial sectors hinders, of course, the development of the setting up of large-scale digital platforms. And this is also one fundamental weakness that China overall still faces. Having said that, China, the Chinese government, particularly also companies, making a huge effort, a large push since 2 years to really build up capabilities. And my colleague Rebecca will take you into who is doing that and what are the specific policy mechanisms to do so. Rebecca, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Kristin. What is the Chinese government doing to try to overcome all these weaknesses and challenges that Kristin just mentioned? So first of all, it has adopted a top-down, highly strategic and comprehensive approach to really stimulate and drive the development of industrial internet platforms in China. As you can see, hopefully depicted here in this colorful graph. I'm not going into the details here. You can find a full mapping of all the institutions involved in our report. I just want to point out that the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology has been tasked with leading and facilitating China's digital platform development. And it does so primarily by overseeing a pilot demonstration work. We're seeing a pretty comprehensive effort to test, scale, and regulate industrial platforms that are supposed to be nationally and internationally competitive, at least that's the ambition, in 3 main areas, namely, number 1, regional platforms, number 2, sector-specific platforms in industries ranging from petrochemicals to power generation, and finally, cross-sectoral platforms, meaning digital platforms that can orchestrate value co-creation across different industries at the same time. In 2018, for the first project batch, the Chinese government allocated about 500 billion euros to make this happen. Could you kindly move to the next slide? Yes, so from central planning, of course, local implementation follows. And in 2019, we saw several provincial and municipal governments publishing detailed plans where digital platforms were really elevated in terms of their importance in industrial policy work at the local level. A key trend is the establishment of regional platforms or platform clusters through partnerships, public-private partnerships with leading platform providers in China. A parallel effort, of course, goes into building the enabling infrastructure that China needs to support platform business models. So as you can see, this includes data centers, cloud infrastructure, and of course the 5G rollout. You may have seen that during the COVID-19 pandemic, 5G rollout in Chinese cities was really prioritized and accelerated. Next slide. So the second aspect is funding mechanism, funding support. Beijing seeks to encourage more market-driven financing for the digital platform economy. For example, platform providers are encouraged to raise funds in overseas capital markets, to attract investment from venture capital funds. At the same time, though, Beijing keeps injecting state capital into the digital platform economy through various means, ranging from regional cash subsidies to partnerships between state-owned enterprises and local government funds. And recently, this happened after we finished our research, the government started to emphasize new infrastructure. What does that mean? It means digital and technological infrastructure that's supposed to guide China's growth and innovation in the years to come. And industrial internet platforms are included in that effort. And Premier Li Keqiang just during the 2 sessions announced new credit support and local government bonds to fund that infrastructure. So it remains to be seen whether it will be the market really driving this new phase of China's platform economy or state subsidies. The next aspect I'd like to talk about is standardization. Could you move to the next slide? Thank you. So the next aspect, of course, to support Chinese industrial platforms is to set up robust technical standards. China lacks standards that can support interoperability and ensure safety of the platforms. And that's something that's recognized by Chinese policymakers and experts as a real problem. So the ambition is to set up a basic standard system by 2020 and then a unified and comprehensive system by 2025. The main priority is to protect the security of industrial data. China fears that vulnerabilities in industrial control systems may jeopardize national security. At the same time, China also wants to unleash the underutilized potential of all the industrial data that it produces, because a core issue in China is that there are a lot of data islands and data isn't utilized for digital business models, as Kristin mentioned earlier. Third aspect is to promote Chinese companies' participation in international standard setting in partnership with Germany, which is really seen as the main partner and the main model for China. Next slide, please. When it comes to the platform providers landscape in China, we analyzed in the study over 200 platform companies. They are mostly located in the most economically dynamic areas of China, and we provide a few case studies at the end of our report. Here, I just want to mention that cross-sectoral platforms are really at the core of China's ambitions. They are developed by national champions, both state-owned companies and private companies, which are expected to make that happen, to really foster this cross-sectoral approach. So we have players like Huawei, like Haier, XCMG, etc., all setting up new platforms. Another aspect is that internet companies in China, such as Baidu and Alibaba and Tencent, are moving from e-commerce to the industrial internet, making huge investments. And what they can bring to the table, I guess, is their expertise in platform business models. At the same time, manufacturers like Haier or Xiaomi can leverage their strengths in hardware, and they use increasingly sophisticated technology to analyze a lot of consumer data to improve production, which is at the core of Industry 4.0. So we're seeing some emerging strengths in areas like, for example, smart home IoT in China. A final point is on foreign participation. Just very briefly, we observed that foreign companies have limited say in platform standardization and regulation in China. So on paper, the government promotes a win-win open digital platform economy, But at the same time, it is true that a number of provisions in the cybersecurity law do impact foreign companies by basically favoring domestic industrial control systems and therefore domestic digital platforms as well. On that, I'd like to turn it over to Kristin, who will discuss implications for Germany and for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Indeed, I think you have well laid out the findings of the study and also really the dynamic and the multifaceted dimensions of this topic, which we, by the way, also really grateful. We've drawn on a lot of expertise, I think also by many of you here in the audience. We have done expert interviews with company representatives, with policy decision makers, also with researchers from other institutes. So we're really grateful for that we have been able to combine and facilitate all the different expertise, which is clearly out there when it comes to China's digital platform economy. Given the multi-dimensions of this initiative of China, we have come up with 3 baskets of recommendations. The first one is that Germany, and we humbly limit ourselves to give recommendations in the realm of the German context, but of course, and that's also part why we hope to open up the discussion, inspire the discussions, what that might mean for other European countries. But we, as I said, limit ourselves for the study to the German context. The first would be to learn from China's strength in the digital platform economy. And there's several layers to it. I'm just mentioning 2 of them to really better understand and also follow closely the quite unique effort and evolution in that sense that China has been pursuing in terms of cross-sectoral, industrial, and also regional focused platforms. Clearly also, I think in terms of Rebecca mentioned that investment into new or digital infrastructure when it comes to data center capacity and 5G connectivity, I think that's well understood and important also to take this as an example of how things also should evolve here in Europe. Second basket clearly is also to condition cooperation with China to pursue German or European, in that sense, interests, to really make sure, and I take one example out here, to promote joint research projects, so to say lighthouse projects, which we have a lot, of course, but that they not only are taking place on Chinese soil, which is of course convenient, partly to the more flexible data regulations. But I think it's also important to move this into the German or the European dimension, to also be able to store and to retrieve and to control, for example, data stored here on European servers. Third and final basket is to mitigate the risks from a highly politicized environment in China. As you all know, when it comes to regulations, and cybersecurity regulations are specifically important for the realm of digital platform economy, they tend to be vague, they tend to be interpreted also sometimes on a case-to-case basis, and I think really policymakers and companies should also ensure to exchange information and also to pressure the Chinese government to really for a consistent and comprehensive and clear approach here. And of course, I think we also should be aware that the industrial Internet of Things platforms can have dual use purposes when it comes to surveillance equipment, when it comes to equipment used by police or the military. And I'm saying this also, and I would like to end on this note, in the light of that today is, as we know, the anniversary of the crackdown of the protest movement in China 31 years ago. So I think we have to take into account that whatever we do also in the economic realm has political and societal repercussions for the Chinese society, but also of course for our own societies. Thank you very much. Over to you, Claudia, for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Kristin, and thank you, Rebecca, for your introduction into a study which is in reality a lot longer, and you can all read it on our website, www.merics.org. Yes, let's move into the panel discussion after hearing so much about the intricacies and different levels of China's digital platform economy and about this very coordinated approach state and companies take to move this forward. But we've also heard about many challenges on the ground, and I am happy I will introduce again our panel here. Joining Kristin on our virtual stage are Markus Heß from the German Ministry for Economics, Svenja Falk, researcher at Accenture consulting firm, and we have Andreas Hube from SAP, who is the head of the China Liaison-Office. Andreas, I would like to kick it off with you. SAP produces software for enterprise resource planning worldwide, and China is a very important market for your company and has been for many, many decades. Maybe you could give us an impression of how the situation in the machine room or on the ground is. How does cooperation with Chinese partners work in the realm of industrial digitalization, or maybe even in digital platform development, if you want to get more specific here?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks a lot for the opportunity and the invitation. Yeah, SAP is indeed, for SAP, China is a very important market for sure, not only as a sales market, basically, but also for development and especially also innovation. And in this overall context, for sure, Industry 4.0 and the related industrial Internet of Things plays a very key role. Maybe a few facts. We are in China, actually, we had our first customer in 1992 and started with offices in 1995. So basically we are now close to, soon 30 years in China. And over this time, for sure, we saw a lot of development also in terms of cooperation with the different, with customers, but also very much with the government. And I have to say, in this case, for sure, we very early also addressed and aligned our strategy very much with the government in terms of the digitalization or the informatization, the Qinqihua back then it was called, end of the 90s. And this was the first time basically where we already saw that how far the government is actually driving and enabling actually also digitalization of companies and putting out a master plan basically to get basically business application software, especially as you mentioned, enterprise resource planning into companies and seeing how this can actually drive the informatization of those companies. And we see now basically with the advent of Industry 4.0 in liaison back then with the now not anymore named China 2025, and now very much the push on the industrial Internet of Things with relation to all the industry Internet platforms, basically a new layer of this. So basically from SAP side, as I said, we are staying to the strategy, we work very closely on both sides, for sure, also with the German government and with the associations, and for sure also on the Chinese side with the government on various levels. So it's not always for sure the national level, which sets out, as you also put very nicely in various studies, the direction, but it's very much also then the execution also on the regional and the local level with the city governments and the regional governments, as you also put here and there out in the study. So in this, what we see is basically, you're right, basically we're seeing a very high demand in terms of cooperation here and also of knowledge, as you also addressed in your study that actually there is a lack in terms of the aspect of B2B and the industrial side of things. And this is definitely where Germany, with I think the very good initiative, let's call it like this, also with the platform Industry 4.0 in this context, plays a very strong role. And for us, it's for sure important to continue this, how to say, this dialogue. And as you also showed in your study, basically, we have very key platforms, basically.
Markus, we can't hear you. I think Markus has.
Apologies.
Andreas,
yes.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Now you're back.
Disconnect. Yes, apologies. I'm not sure when you lost me. So maybe I keep it short.
It was maybe 10 seconds.
Okay, very fast.
No big deal.
So long version short, basically, We do have very strategic cooperations with those also mentioned internet platform, which is very much came from engagements on the customer basis. So all of those companies, be it like Xugong, like X70CG, the Sunny, Haier, and so on, we have a very strong engagement since many, many years from the idea of a, from an enterprise resource planning perspective, and we're now taking this partnership further to work with them together on the internet platform. Maybe I stop there, the risk of.
Thank you, Andreas. But now you were clearly audible for everyone. Svenja, if I may move on to you, as a researcher at Accenture, you take particular interest in what tomorrow's business environments will look like. And as Markus Heß mentioned, you are sitting on many dialogue formats together with Chinese counterparts also. You've researched China's vibrant development and progress in innovative fields like AI, big data. You have many articles on that out there. Where do you see Germany in this context? Will German and European companies be able to hold up in this competitive environment that is, well, in a way still dominated by US and Chinese companies, at least to my mind?
Yeah, thank you very much, Claudia, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, a huge compliment to the researchers of MERICS, a fantastic piece of work, and which is contributing to what we all need much more of. And this is sort of an understanding of China's real progress when it comes to sort of bringing the physical and the digital world together. And this brings me to sort of the question, where do German and European companies stand? Yeah, I think we have a huge opportunity to sort of play an important and critical role into the economy of the future. As you know, Germany is traditionally a product and machinery exporting country. This is where we build our competitiveness on. This is at the heart of what we, where our sort of quality and, of life and everything rests on. This is changing because obviously the quality of the products is still very important. However, now it's sort of bringing together, it's about bringing together sort of the quality of the products and the data that is disseminated by them. And there, I think we can, in Europe, if we are a bit faster into sort of developing sort of the digital infrastructure that is needed to do that, and come up with models and ideas to not only scale, but also monetize digital services, we can play a critical role. Where we are sort of a little bit behind is when it comes to actually having a plan. China has a plan with the Internet Plus sort of strategy, their approaches to standardizations, so clear targets, milestones, interventions, and budgets that are underpinning that. This is where I think we have to sort of be much better, because very often we have opinions on China rather than real sort of industrial strategies, especially when it comes to the European level. So overall, I'm very optimistic if we sort of are a bit faster in developing the right digital business models, bring together the physical and the digital world, and have an idea on a strategy rather than an opinion on sort of how to go about it.
Thank you, Svenja. Let me now ask Markus Heß a question. Markus, you just elaborated yourself in your introductory remarks on how the German government supports German companies in having a dialogue with China on topics of Industry 4.0, and you're trying to bring people together and engage in discussions. Could you maybe get a little bit into the details of that and tell us a little how these dialogue formats work nowadays? What are the most pressing topics discussed there, and where are maybe challenges in the discussion with the Chinese counterparts? And I have to unmute you. I'm very sorry that I am so slow. Doesn't work.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you, and I will make you visible in a second. I am very sorry. All my fault.
Just figure a screenshot from my previous remarks and everything's fine. Yeah, to come back what you've said, that is extremely interesting. Let me start before I come to your question, picking up what Svenja has mentioned. The opportunities. Sometimes people talk about opportunities, and that is a kind of self-assuring, we have to see the opportunities in the markets or somewhere else. Where the opposite holds true, there is no opportunity. So it's a kind of, well, motivation. In this case, it's totally different. There are vast opportunities in China for European business, for European companies. And just to illustrate, we have roughly 5,000 companies in China doing business already. So to German companies. So there is a need to support them to the extent possible and to listen to them to the utmost extent possible, because when you have two companies doing business somewhere else, it's easy to know what they want. 5,000 is a different thing. So our Industry 4.0 cooperation with China is based on the fact that we have to support companies that are in the manufacturing services. The manufacturing industries, they offer services related to the products, just services and stuff like that. So our cooperation with China is twofold. On the one hand side, we have a political cooperation strand that is, we have signed in 2015, a memorandum of understanding to define the political goals and to come to a certain understanding how the processes in setting up the dialogue and supporting the experts and the meetings from both sides will be set from both governments and will be supported by those two governments. And to look into it, to kind of monitor how this MOU is evolving over time. We have a monitoring process that we don't call this monitoring process, but we have ministerial level meetings throughout the year. So we are in close contact with our homologues on the other side in Beijing, in the ministries, to closely look into the current or overcome or to come problems that companies might face, and in how far we can, from the political side, from the administration side, support or find the solutions to support the companies. So to give this a kind of physical framework or shape, we meet once a year. Last year on vice minister level, we had a meeting in Berlin, 300 participants from politics, business, and science. And that was really helpful because to understand each other, it's easy to exchange papers and views and stuff like that. But to get to a close cooperation, you have to get into contact. And that is something we have very high on the agenda concerning the Sino-German relationship, because if you have the chance to talk about something, you have the chance to talk about problems which are there and are part of the, well, let's say, cultural, political framework for the businesses to participate in the market. Those political talks under the umbrella of the MOU are complemented with our second level, the companies level. It's more or less the heart of the cooperation. I mean, I'm lacking any expertise in stuff like that, and setting up a dialogue on Industry 4.0 without the companies, the expertise there involved would be something that would not be fruitful in the long end. So We have a working platform for our German and Chinese enterprises. They meet continuously, they discuss the challenges, the latest developments on Industry 4.0, and that means we discuss what is the essence of Industry 4.0, the standards, the philosophy, and the openness, and all things related to that, and what this would mean in reality on the ground in China. So the platform is open to all interested German and Chinese enterprises. And of course, in the future, it's also possibly open to European actors. It depends on, for instance, I mentioned in my opening remarks, Gaia X. We get a more and more intertwined situation between the cloud issues and the Industry 4.0 processes. So within the framework of these company cooperation, we have expert groups. They were established in 2019. They work closely together with the platform economy topics. The expert group on digital business models, as Svenja can develop on, and the expert group on industrial internet. SAP is leading the expert group on artificial intelligence, for instance. And those expert groups develop white papers which are seen as recommendations to the governments, and they will be officially published to give everybody the opportunity to get a hands-on experience of what has been found out in these expert groups from both countries. So the aim behind all of this is a common understanding of what Industry 4.0 should be in the particular environment framework of China. And where we have to explain something more, or where we have expertise on the other side, we can build on, and without coming together, meeting and setting up recommendation papers, that will simply not happen properly. And then coming back to the political pillar, we are just in the phase right now to have an update or a new MOU being negotiated between both sides. And into that, we will feed in every experience and expertise we have gathered from the first 5 years, and from the companies and the Industry 4.0 expert groups, meetings, and results which were achieved there. So you've asked what are the most pressing topics. Well, sometimes it's simple to answer. It's sometimes the cultural differences in the approach to something, where you can talk about a different approach with the German background or the Chinese background, and that is something in technical terms where the experts can come together. But take, for instance, cybersecurity regulations. I mean, the lack of cross-border data transfer is hindering the free flow of data, and this impacts business operations as well as innovation. For us, this is a simply said phrase. For the Chinese, it's a given legal framework they have to work with, and so we have to explain to them why, to us, this is something that is not a good base for good cooperation. I refer to what Kristin Shi-Kupfer has mentioned, the vague regulations on critical information infrastructures and their operators. They create grave concerns that sensitive data must be stored and handed over to Chinese authorities or state-owned enterprises for review processes. For us, this is something we would not love to deal with for a long time or at all, because it's to us it's a kind of stumbling block to good cooperation. What is crucial in terms of Industry 4.0 and the way it works: standardization, interoperability, as Industry 4.0 defines these aspects. They need a global borderless concept. So we are not well advised if we have a Chinese version of Industry 4.0 in terms of philosophy, and framework of Industry 4.0 understanding. So what we have to bring across is it works this way internationally because it's a common ground people can subscribe to, and we would like to have this established as well in China. So, but what we see is that international standards are sometimes modified for the Chinese markets by Chinese authorities and institutions. And these increase production costs, international companies, and they, well, should be avoided. So these are the main obstacles from the technical or the processes point of view. And then of course you have the overall, always in the change, being the political framework. I mean, if you look at the actual headlines, that is a different situation if one year ago. So, and there you have to find a common ground for conversation and for not shying away from having hard talk about framework conditions for companies that have to be in good shape. So what is good shape? It is perhaps as well the overall perspective of the respective countries' governments' policies. And we think there should be a good spirit of cooperation there as well.
Thank you, Markus. If I may briefly chip in here, you just mentioned the changing political environment. If I may ask Andreas, based on his professional experience in China, do you as a representative of SAP feel this on the ground? How do you deal with it? And if I may add a more technical question that I got in from the audience, we have Matthias Kuom asking what the participation of foreign companies like SAP looks like in digital platforms that are cross-sectoral. And I mean, that's where you meet Chinese counterparts. Does politics play a role in these talks? And how does that play out?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, fully agree with the assessment. I mean, we also, as SSB, we are working very closely also with in the cooperation between MIIT and the BMWI there, leading, as you said, the working group for artificial intelligence. And for sure, but on the other side, it's very much basically our engagement on the local and regional level, where we for sure see, as I said, basically, how to say, a high interest in cooperation. How does it exactly look like? So usually it's basically several companies basically which the Chinese government would like to bring together in terms of from an internet platform perspective. And as we see, for example, in the case of Xigong, there was also a lot of, how to say, certain push from the government basically to get this cooperation going. The role from our side at the moment, as I said earlier, also is very much currently on the utilization of the experience in the ERP and the enterprise resource planning place, plus our expertise for sure in the context of overall from the industry 4.0 perspective, and there basically to see how we can actually help to work together.
Oh, now we're losing Andreas again. Let's see if he comes back. If not, Andreas. So he dropped out.
Yeah, apologies. I'm back again. This is not SAP technology, and unfortunately, I have to do it from home. So maybe I switched to my mobile phone. So apologies, so I got interrupted. But just to short, basically, our involvement is very much basically on the in the solution side, that we actually embed our solutions, and depending on the partnership and depending on the cooperation, basically that we embed our solutions, our cloud solutions, especially around Industry 4.0 solutions, and basically be able to offer them through their offering, and basically also have those platforms being able to offer them to especially small and medium-sized enterprises. In this context, I have to for sure say, I think as you also put in your study, for sure the utilization is still rather at the beginning level, but basically also the scenarios which are utilized are still rather on the broad scale rather simple, in terms of we see a lot of interest and demand around predictive maintenance scenarios and so on. But definitely there's a lot of room still that we can how to say, further improve, and also many of the corporations are, how to say, still in a detailed planning and in the sandbox stage. But I think over the next couple of
okay, now we lost you again.
Apologies, let me change the connection, but I hope I addressed roughly the answer.
Thank you, Andreas. My last question would go to Svenja before I open up the floor for the Q&A, and I already see questions coming in here. Svenja, when we talked on the phone for preparing this seminar, you told me about a survey you did with regards to the COVID situation, and it was mentioned before that, of course, this whole pandemic has shown us all how important digital technologies are for us, especially in this situation. And you and your team looked into what China made of this. And maybe you could say a few words how this pandemic has affected the digital sector in China. And maybe what should we think about that?
Yeah, thank you, Claudia. So we started actually in March, given that China was ahead of the curve to undertake not only consumer surveys, but also spoke to decision makers on the ground and surveyed them and looked at almost 200 case studies to understand what Chinese companies are actually doing. And there are three things that I would like to highlight here that I found were very, very interesting. So the first one was that Chinese companies started scenario planning very early on and did their business continuity activities across the ecosystem. This is a very important point. So it's not only looking at how can I bring my own company back, if you will, to full production capacity, but did that across their suppliers, their clients, to make sure that the whole system was uplifted. The platform companies played a really critical role here in order to make that happen. And like everywhere else in the world, sort of the pandemic was a huge catalyst for trends that have been there before. And also a huge test bed. So we have been able to see from data that technology adoption have changed significantly before and during the pandemic. Now everything more geared towards sort of the cloud, artificial intelligence, and also B2B platform adoption. Something very difficult in both countries, in China and Germany. We see in both countries an increase in adoption that is related to the pandemic. And what is important here is that if you do things, if you increase technology adoption and if you do things across the ecosystem, you learn how to do it. So there's an amazingly steep learning curve, and especially when it comes to the point around ecosystems. Ecosystems is where everybody sees the future from a scale perspective and monetization perspective. And here, China is clearly ahead of the curve in learning from it, and the government has revitalized their sort of new infrastructure strategy, which was already formulated last year and is now aiming to bring until the end of this year 600,000 5G base stations into the field, 20 AI pilot initiatives, and so on and so forth. So it's absolutely amazing how China and Chinese companies and the government is using that to learn where the frictions in their industrial strategies are and how to bring it forward. The second one is that we saw a strong push to omni-channel. So many companies are asking, do we still need physical offices? But in fact, this omni-channel experience also for the consumers, the B2B customers, has actually been amazing. So we saw things like automotive OEMs selling cars over webcasts with 500,000 participants, building full immersive experiences of machines and equipments. So this has been, again, a steep learning curve, and much of it is here to stay. Yeah, we will not go back to the same sort of pre-world. And in fact, business leaders across the world tell us in Accenture, we don't want to go back where we were, and sort of taking the learnings from this crisis as a basis to start is a good thing. The last thing that I would like to mention, which I think is also very important, is sort of the rise of purpose and the idea of healthcare. One of my colleagues said, every business is a health business these days, and there's some truth to it. And we see sort of companies in China developing purpose-driven products with sort of experiences and promises to customers in the insurance space, in the retail space, and all of that is based on sort of also changing attitudes in consumers. We asked consumers in China, as I said, and 75% of them said that the way companies put purpose before profit, and it's visible for us, has becoming really important. So I think these three things, and there are many others, tell us that using this crisis as a test bed, knowing it's a catalyst, and knowing speed has increased. So as I said earlier, we have to become even faster in Germany and Europe to think about infrastructure, to think about profitable digital business model, and to think about scale and monetization.
Thank you, Svenja. Okay, we see a lot of an innovation push coming out of China despite Corona or because of Corona. China, we've heard a lot of talk about China being a sort of example in the way they push for developing digitalization and digital platforms in particular. So my last question would be going to Kristin. We like to challenge each other here at MERICS. So with all these positive aspects surrounding this digitalization push in China, Kristin, we do mention a lot of critical aspects also in our study. Have we maybe been too critical here, or what would be your summarizing take, let's say, of this panel?
Well, no, I don't think we have been overly critical. I mean, risk assessment, is of course also part of what researchers specifically do, but of course also what policymakers and companies do. And I'm sure all of you on the panel and in the audience also are continuously doing that. I want to highlight though two elements which became very clear to me also, of course, listening to the panel, and I think which we all, or at least we at MERICS and probably all of us, I think, have to look more into. And Andreas and Svenja and Markus touched on them. One is to really move beyond the national kind of broad brush, in a sense, which we did in our study, because we looked mainly, at the policy documents, the layouts, also some of the implementation on a national level, which is still kind of evolving. But we have to look at the sub-national level. We really have to look at the local context, also to specific industrial context, because things might be very different. And I think we should also not be blinded, in a sense, by some of the top-notch smart factories or projects that we see in China. Of course, they exist, but they don't exist across China, as Andreas and all of you have mentioned. In other areas in China and other industries, things look a lot different. And I think that's also something we should take into account and also acknowledge, also to leverage really against, in the sense of also recognizing what that China still wants from us. It's, in a sense, it's a window of opportunity also to pursue interests and also principles when it comes to data protection, for example, from a European point of view vis-a-vis China. That brings me to my very briefly second point. Talking about opportunities, yes, of course, that's important, but I think we also have to recognize, especially from a mid to long-term perspective, and again, when we put this push of China into a broader perspective of their overall industrial policy, that in a sense we have to be aware that we might build up also in that sense our own competitor, strengthen China in ways which we may or may not want to strengthen them, in the sense of, again, being aware of the moving political environment, specifically when it comes to data security, data protection, national security, which would allow, of course, Chinese companies and the Chinese government also to access data potentially. And linking to that, of course, also not stop looking towards the US. That's not something we've covered in our study because that was beyond of the scope of the study. But of course, Europe should, and Germany should, and will continue to also look to the US and cooperate with the US when it comes to the whole digitization and platform economy. I leave it at that first, Claudia. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin. And now let's maybe move to the Q&A. Sorry, Andreas.
If I just make maybe a comment also a little bit in this direction also with regards to the study and what I said earlier, and the situation and status of those digital platforms right now, maybe also in direction of, we talked a lot about Industry 4.0, and it's more kind of my personal opinion. I think we as Germany did a great job in terms of, especially also big kudos to the government and the institutions around building the idea of Industry 4.0, and then again the platform of Industry 4.0. And as I said, SAP for sure, as Mr. Heß said, is a key member of there. But over the last couple of years, we saw actually, for sure, when I looked, and we had many Chinese delegations, I spoke at many events around this topic of Industry 4.0. There was a lot of willingness to learn. There was a very limited understanding, but basically this is changing. So basically we see really China catching up in the way, and for us it's maybe more the question, maybe it's an open question in terms of what is next for us? How do we stay basically competitive, and how do we basically use this advantage which we still have, again, also to touch on points like data aspects and security. I mean, let's put it like this, when we have already high figures around the Industry 4.0 community claiming that like what Hire is, for example, doing is the best what you can do currently at Industry 4.0, where does it leave us? How do we go next? How do we see this whole in a European context? So this would be maybe more an open question for us to think about. How do we stay as Germany, maybe in a European context also competitive? How do we take this to the next level to stay basically also, how to say, let's face it, interesting to China? Because when you informally talk to people from the Chinese side, for sure they're saying, as Bill Gates back then said to SAP, we just work with you because you're still faster than us, and because you're doing things what we cannot do now. Otherwise, we don't need you. This is, let's be realistic, that's the same with the Chinese side. If we become uninteresting. So I just mean positively, we have a great opportunity here. It's just a question, how we take it to the next level, and how can we maybe take this game, what is very much driven from Germany, also to a European level. And in this whole effort, basically position European as an even more complementary partner. If you, for example, look in the areas of artificial intelligence, I think there's many things what we can do in the aspect of industrial artificial intelligence, also, for example, together with France, to really become a more stronger and outspoken partner to China. More as a comment.
Thank you, Andreas. The European aspect is certainly very important. Also, given that we have an important summit coming up in September, where China and European leaders will meet if things are not cancelled. And I would assume that these questions of how to collaborate in innovation and research and stuff like that would be a topic on that summit as well. But let's take this discussion to another level now. I would like to enter into the Q&A session, and dear participants, you can see the rules for this on the slide we just put up. And I already have a few questions that came in during our discussion. I would give the word first to Sabine Stricker-Kellerer, who has raised her hand for hours now. And Sabine, I will unmute your audio now. I hope. Today we do seem to have glitches here. It doesn't really work. So maybe Antonia, you could try, my technical assistant in the background, and in the meantime,
can you hear me now?
Yes, now you're here. Great.
Okay, I had to reply to your unmute. That's the secret. You unmute.
That seems to be a new feature.
That's a new feature. It's the new Zoom update. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for the great study. I really like it. It's sort of all the European China problems in a nutshell. We touched upon many of them. Let me just pick out two I have. The one is standard setting. My question, is there room for optimism that at least in that area, we can participate in standard setting, or we can get the Chinese to cooperate in standard setting on an international basis, which is just a key topic in all other industries we will be involved in. So, because this is cross-border, is there a chance? And the second one is, I heard some rather pessimistic comments on China's cybersecurity law and cross-border data transfer. I don't think we are there yet. I think we are there yet in many aspects, but the implementing rules for cross-border data on important business data, not personal data, important business data, have not been finalized and have been put on hold for many, many months now already. And I think one of the reasons could be that Chinese industry representatives might have a say here, and also local governments might have a say, and think that their business can only grow and prosper if we have a free flow of important business data out of China and in of China again. So I can draw a small optimism from there. And I want to know whether the panel shares that small optimism. Optimism sort of runs for both questions, which is a rare currency these days. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine. So who on the panel would be willing to answer this? And on the standard question, maybe even Rebecca has a few words to say.
Yeah, maybe just on the last point, what you mentioned, Sabine, was very much, I think there was a glimpse of hope, basically very much what you also, to just complement what you said during the last visit of Premier Li Keqiang in Berlin in 2018, where there was this BMW I hosted panel basically, and I think there was a very interesting panel discussion, I remember, around this topic, around especially industrial data, sharing of industrial data. So I think from that meeting on, there was a lot of, how to say, hope that there might be a positive direction also of collaborating. But however, honestly speaking, I haven't heard anything furthermore. It would be interesting to see whether in this context there was a further follow-up, but at least at that moment it was a clear positive signal for corporations to work together.
Thank you, Andreas. And Rebecca, maybe you would like to chip in on the standards question.
Yeah, just maybe on the standard setting issue. I think probably one entry point for foreign companies here would be to lobby within industry associations in China that play a big role in proposing industry standards for industrial internet platforms. In particular, we looked into the Alliance of Industrial Internet, which is important in this context because what they do is they produce detailed studies on how standardization in China should develop, and then they submit proposals to standardization bodies that are in some cases adopted. And we saw that indeed the latest standardization framework for the industrial internet that was adopted by the SAC actually mirrors what the Alliance of Industrial Internet proposed. And there are a few companies, foreign companies, only a handful, that sit in some of the working groups there. Maybe Andreas has something to add on that. I saw that SAP is also part of some of the working groups. So I'm also optimistic that, you know, in that format, there is a way to really talk to other platform providers in China and to lobby from an industry side. So that would be, to my mind, the obvious entry point. Just quickly on the issue of important data and the cybersecurity law, we also saw that all the standards for the transfer of important data when it comes to production, so production data, were still in draft format. So we ended our research in December last year, and it wasn't clear whether important data also included industrial data or not, because some drafts included that, some drafts didn't. So again, it's a pending question. It's really an open question whether that will really impact foreign companies. But I think there are reasons to be concerned about at least the confusion and the lack of clarity in some of the provisions.
Thank you, Rebecca. I do actually have a question here in the Q&A feed referring to the cybersecurity law. Georg Stieler asking whether the plans of the Chinese government could actually threaten the entire existence of companies, and if one could really recommend a German manufacturing entity to fully digitize and use a Chinese industrial cloud in this context. Maybe that's a question Andreas or Markus Heß might be able to answer or comment on, but whoever feels inspired.
Yeah, well, I just can say from our expertise, for sure there is a risk, and we see also the risk overall in the overall development, but for us it's key, sounds obvious, but to really stay close to this topic and currently constantly try for engagement in terms of, and always reach out, as Sabine also kind of indicated, there are certain things which are put out there but not really executed or then delay. Many of those things are actually happening due to influence. So basically, it's we had actually, sorry, a while back, no big secret, but we actually had one of the CAC vice ministers visiting us at our headquarters, where we really had a very open discussion and on various topics around cybersecurity. One of the outcome was that we, for example, became member of the TC 260, and in other things that our voice, we feel at least more heard. And it's, I think, basically kind of the holistic engagement, also how you approach. And I personally can say from personal experience, it is rather a constructive dialogue. Maybe sometimes it doesn't appear so much outside, but if you really talk to the people and talk on direct issues, there's a certain influence. But for sure, in the end, we need to see what is coming out. But overall, basically, I just want to say it's important not to sit back, but to constantly actively engage on various levels. I know the European Chamber of Commerce, where we're also part and leading a working group around cybersecurity, is also doing a lot of work there. So there's a lot of work done, and we see through.
So now we lost you again. 2 more seconds. Andreas?
Yes, hello again. I'm not sure where I was dropped, but basically I think I made my point.
Thank you. Markus, you want to add to this, or should I? Oh yes, I have to. I have to. Here you go. Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful.
Technical. No, I just want to support and stress what Andreas has mentioned. Sometimes I have the impression that the distance between China and here leads to a kind of, don't get me wrong, misjudgment of announcements. I mean, if there is always a channel to discuss things, that needs to be clarified, because sometimes you have those headlines saying there is a threat, and then the subtitles explain you why there is a threat of doing business in China. There are a lot of obstacles, and there is sometimes a kind of chaotic situation, at least to companies who are used to work in a more or less culturally homogeneous way. But then I've witnessed, as long as I'm in that dialogue with our Chinese counterparts, never a situation where they refused to talk about what we feel the need to talk about in terms of helping companies, because something should be in the back of our minds. Sometimes those Chinese regulations hamper Chinese companies as well. And to a certain extent, those Chinese companies are not interested to be hampered by their own government more, or to speak the other way around, in the same sense as European companies, or for instance, German companies would like to be hampered in striving and doing their business and offering products and what have you. So to a certain extent, there is the same, back of your mind thinking within companies there and here. And that has to be taken into account when you talk to the Chinese governments or administrations on the sub-level, federal level, the municipality level. And sometimes those stumble blocks will be removed as quick as one can think. So.
Thank you, Markus. I have someone raising his hand here. Madhu, I can only see the first name, and I'm trying to deactivate your audio, to activate your audio here, Madhu. You might have to confirm that I did this.
Hello.
Yes, now we can hear you. Hello. Ask your question.
No,
and maybe
actually,
say to who you want to ask the question to.
Actually, some of this, my question got addressed because this was more around the risk and not only the data sharing risks, but also, you know, starting any initiative together in terms of a joint initiative with a Chinese company or an entity, and eventually getting bought over, because I think that's the trend we've seen in couple of cases in the past. So I was just wondering about that, but I think it did get partially covered.
Okay, thank you, Madhu. Anyway, it was nice talking to you. We are approaching the end of our little session here. I'm very sorry that I cannot pick up all the questions that I have on the list here. I'm getting one question that sounds kind of interesting, and it's a topic we didn't touch upon, so that would maybe be the last question I pick up today. And all the others who ask questions, we will forward them to our experts, and maybe they can get back to you if it's a specific question and help you with the answer. But now let me get to Sandy's question here. What the role of Huawei is in this whole context, and how the EU should deal with that. That's a big one, I would say, but whoever feels up for it, please. Kristin.
Yeah, I can kick it off. Huawei is for sure an important cloud provider, also in the industrial realm of digital platforms, a key provider, I would say, especially in the IaaS, infrastructure as a service layer. And I mean, we have a whole discussion on Huawei, how to deal with Huawei as a supplier of 5G. My own personal position on that is, and I'm interested to hear the other panelists, is we should really seek first and foremost for European solutions. I think the whole debate on not only technical security risks, but risks related again to the political and regulatory environment are very valid, and I would support the caution which has been raised on various levels when looking into companies which are basically embedded in an environment which are non-compliant with liberal democracy and with a real rule of law. That's my own personal opinion on Huawei.
Anyone else who would like to add to this?
Yeah, maybe from a SAP perspective side, I mean, it's no secret that Huawei is one of our global actually technology partners, and as also stated by our CEO recently in several articles, we actually do have a very good and solid partnership. And sometimes maybe, I mean, Huawei is huge. It's not only about the 5G part, for sure, understand the concerns. And so I just can say from the areas where we're working together with them, especially in the Chinese market, for sure, I have to say, a couple of the projects around industry.
SAP is suffering from disruption, but
yeah, maybe it's not my day.
Call you back.
Yes, we have to talk to our provider here. So, but maybe it's a topic. Maybe I'm not supposed to talk about positively about Huawei. But just to finish this, so basically, I just want to say a couple of the initiatives and the model projects actually we had in the context of the German-Chinese cooperation around China 2025 and Industry 4.0 were actually done with Huawei, and with both sides actually seen as model project. But again, this is maybe a different aspect of Huawei where we work together, especially with regards to our HANA solution and in the context of smart manufacturing. Just want to make sure that people understand there's maybe also a different side to Huawei, or broader, that you have to see Huawei in the broader sense.
Thank you, Andreas. So this discussion could go on forever, but I'm sorry we have reached the time limit for today, and I want to seize the opportunity to thank all our panelists, Svenja Falk, Andreas Hube, Markus Heß from the German Ministry for Economics and Energy. Thanks again also for the support of our study. Rebecca and Kristin, thank you for your great presentation, and to all you listeners who hung out with us for complete 90 minutes. Thank you and hope you join us again in the future. We have more webinars upcoming. There's one I can recommend next week, June 11th. Our research fellow Michael Haasbroek will discuss Hong Kong's financial future with our chief economist Max Zenglein. So you're happy to join us for that occasion. And of course, there's more publications coming up. For instance, on Thursday, we'll have another issue of our China Briefing newsletter. And if you're interested, sign up in the link that we just sent out in the chat. Thank you again to everyone, and I wish you all a great day and see you next time. Bye.